All right. One of the most challenging technical aspects to playing guitar, whether you're playing fingerstyle or with a pick, is crossing over strings, skipping over strings, but especially using like what flat pickers would call a cross-picking pattern or string crossing pattern can be very difficult for a fingerstyle player. So one thing that we need to do is really continue to work on our muting technique so that each note is clear as you play across the strings. So generally speaking, what I like to do is an exercise that I call subdividing and conquering. And what this does is just basically isolate one note per string, and then 2 notes per string, 3 notes per string, 4, etc. And that will allow you to build and develop your right-hand technique so that you're comfortable and very fluid, regardless of how many notes happen to fall on a string as you're improvising something. So if I were to just look at one string at a time, I could even just play like a G bar chord or something. Could be anything. I would kind of like alternate picking. If I was using a pick, I would alternate between I and M, and I would just play one string at a time. And all I've done there is just basically go through all of my inversions of a G chord, but only using one note at a time. So I'm not playing the exact arpeggios. I'm just really fingering one note on one string and with my right hand just focusing. So as you move across the strings, the motion wants to be generated from your knuckles and have a nice strong, arc, kind of a sweeping motion when you play. That will allow your tone to be really full and big. One mistake that beginning fingerstyle players make is when they're not accustomed to using their fingers to generate the tone. So as a result, they're just only using the very tips of their fingers, and then they just kind of like, try to generate the tone from their fingertip. And you can hear how thin it is. I can't really get much dynamic range. I can't play loud, and the tone is thin as opposed to. So now the tone is generated from my knuckles, and you have a lot more power and strength coming from this part of the hand compared to the fingertip. So that's one thing to be careful of. If you find yourself, using just the tip of your finger, or using the same finger for successive strokes, just take a break from that and really work on playing slow notes with a nice strong arc as you cross the strings. So a great way to start doing that is just outline a chord using one note per string. And you could choose to drop in the third finger on the top string. I do, just because it's there. I mean, it's a lot easier. It makes sense, I think, to use the thumb down here and the IM in the middle strings here. And then if you need to pluck a note on the top string, go ahead and use your ring finger. It's fine. There's no rules. There's no real method to this. Just keep it clean and have a nice, full tone. If you switch to two notes per string, then you can really focus on an IM study. So maybe you'll take a G major pentatonic scale, for example, something that subdivides into 2 notes per string. So again, what we're doing is creating this nice, arc with our 2 fingers. We're muting out the strings with our thumb, as we did in the last example. You may choose to isolate 2 strings to practice crossing back and forth, or just continue to go across all of them in different inversions. In the example in the PDF here, what we have is a series of chords, just sort of a little chord progression. And each chord is outlined with an arpeggio, and there's a couple of different ways that you can play these with your right hand. You can string cross just using IM, or if you're playing an arpeggio, this is a nice technique to adopt into your comping. You can do kind of like a traditional rolling arpeggio using the thumb, P, I for index, M for middle, and then A for the ring finger, and roll back and forth. So the first thing to do, I think, with this example is just look at the placement of the left hand, because the left hand's not going to be doing anything. All of the chords will be, fingered in advance. The right hand will set it in motion. So we start off with a C major 7, C sharp 7, sharp 9, D major 9, E flat 7, flat 9, E minor 7, F major 7, F sharp minor 7, and then finally G. Now, when we play those as individual notes in an arpeggio, I think with the left hand, you don't want to have the notes sound mushy. You want to have them sound just as if they were in a scale, just one individual note at a time. In other words, you don't want to hear this. What you want to hear is this. Each note is independent and full sounding. So in the exercise here, you can cross back and forth through these 4 strings using IM at first. So let's take a look at doing that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you'll notice in every example, follow the fingerings that are on the chart here with your left hand, but you'll also notice in every example that I was using the thumb shadowing and muting technique as I'm rolling back and forth across the strings. Your thumb is there to ensure that you won't have any unnecessary strings ringing that you don't want to play. So try to play this example very slowly at first, really pay attention to the left hand fingerings, and try to get each note sounding independent as opposed to having the notes kind of mush or bleed into one another. And I think with a little time spent on this, you'll really notice a significant improvement in your string crossing ability when you go to improvise a solo.